was something that personally and professionally I felt like I needed to understand better. So what I did is I took all of the interviews where I saw worthiness, where I saw people living that way, and just looked at those. What do these people have in common? And I have a slight office supply addiction, but it's another talk. So I had a manila notebook, a manila folder, and I had a Sharpie. And I was like, what am I going to call this research? And the first words that came to my mind were wholehearted. These are kind of wholehearted people living from this deep sense of worthiness. So I wrote at the top of the manila folder. And I started looking at the data. In fact, I did it first in this in a 4-day, very intensive data analysis where I went back, pulled these interviews, pulled the stories, pulled the incidents. What's the theme? What's the pattern? My husband left town with the kids because I always go into this kind of Jackson Pollock crazy thing, or I'm just like writing and going and kind of just in my researcher mode. And so here's what I found. What they had in common was a sense of courage. And I want to separate courage and bravery for you for a minute. Courage, the original definition of courage, when it first came into the English language, it's from the Latin word cur, meaning heart. And the original definition was to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. And so these folks had, very simply, the courage to be imperfect. They had the compassion to be kind to themselves first and then to others, because as it turns out, we can't practice compassion with other people if we can't treat ourselves kindly. And the last was they had connection, and this was the hard part, as a result of authenticity. They were willing to let go of who they thought they should be in order to be who they were, which is, you have to absolutely do that for connection. The other thing that they had in common was this. They fully embraced vulnerability. They believed that what made them vulnerable made them beautiful. They didn't talk about vulnerability being comfortable, nor did they really talk about it being excruciating, as I had heard it earlier in the shame interviewing. They just talked about it being necessary. They talked about the willingness to say, I love you first. The willingness to do something where there are no guarantees. The willingness to breathe through waiting for the doctor to call after your mammogram. They're willing to invest in a relationship that may or may not work out. They thought this was fundamental. I personally thought it was betrayal. I could not believe.
Okay, I just turned down my volume so I don't go deaf when I plug in my headphones again. So that video clip is really highlighting the stages she went through in her research. She started with talking about shame and researching what shame is. And really that feeling of feeling that you are not enough, I think is something that we all can resonate with. I think that feeling probably at least once a day, if not more, maybe more, but at least once a week, a feeling and wondering how you compare in life, if you are going to succeed, things like that. I think that's something that Renee touched on in her research, is that it's a universal feeling, and she so wisely was able to say that that is shame. And so everyone has their different gremlins, she calls them, those voices in your head that say those terrible things that you should never talk to yourself that way. But I want you to kind of think about, what are your gremlins and what do they say to you to prevent you from moving forward? This is really those voices that say that you're not enough, and figuring out where that lies within you. And I know this is a tough topic. Being vulnerable is very uncomfortable. I think that it's a hard thing to talk about. I was trying to, as as women, I think it's tough about, but I was trying to get my husband to open up, and I think for men it's even tougher to open up to those feelings of vulnerability, and in doing that, tapping into that inner courage. Um, so I encourage you, if you want to share, what those gremlins are, but moving on into that, then she talks about this shame resilience, and this is a quote from the book, about talking about how to find ways to stay engaged and to respond to those times when you are feeling shame, and being able to tap into those inner values of yourself and to practice the emotional courage that you need that aligns with your values. One thing I will say, I'll share, I think one of the ways I personally have felt very vulnerable was when I was making the decision to take a leap of faith and open the Center for Girls Leadership. Some of you may have heard this story or not, but I was in law school at the time, and about halfway through law school, I started feeling very lost. I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I felt that becoming a traditional practicing attorney was something that would not be true to who I am on the inside, and really using all of my skills and my calling, I guess. And so I felt very lost, because when you are, a year and a half in, more than halfway through law school, deciding, whoops, this is maybe not the right path, is a tough thing to come to terms with yourself, but not even that, but then sharing it with other people. And so I had stumbled upon this old dream of mine to start a nonprofit, and it really just stuck with me that maybe this was my answer. This was the thing I was missing, but I had to balance that with the fact that the expectations set when you are in law school are still very traditional, that you would go on, take the bar, practice law in the very traditional sense that everyone thinks of when they hear the word lawyer or attorney. But that just wasn't for me. And so looking back, the hardest part of that journey for me, and really it's my leadership journey, was being able to put words to that conflict inside me and be able to say out loud that this is what I think I need to do, that I do not need to become an attorney in the traditional sense, but I'd like to use my skills and start a nonprofit. So while I still sometimes refer to that as being absolutely crazy, it also took an extraordinary amount of courage to be able to go that route. And I'm so happy that I did. I mean, we're 3 years into the organization being formed and still very much in the baby stages, but being able to take that leap of faith and trusting my gut and putting it out there that this was something I wanted to do was definitely part of that vulnerability. And I think part of that also is just also still hearing people say, oh, wait, you're an attorney? Well, I am, but it's secondary. I mean, what I've done is I work for this organization and started this something that I'm passionate about. So for me, that was definitely an area where I felt shame in not utilizing my degree the way it was supposed to be done and what other people expected. But being able to know and battle that with what Brene was saying in the video clip, by knowing and turning that I'm not enough into I am enough, and finding be comfortable in the uncomfortable. And for a lot of people, myself included, that is one of the toughest things to do. So thinking about just what are your gremlins and what are those things that they say to you and how can you combat them, that is your shame resilience. Another story I have, a couple years ago, well, it was really like a year ago, I started making this change in my life. I used to have this voice inside my head that was very unkind. I was not the nicest person to myself. I would, you could look in the mirror and say, wow, you need to go to the gym, things like that, or, oh, another wrinkle or another gray hair, things like that. And I felt and started noticing how I spoke to myself. And then it hit me that I cannot be the leader of this organization about inspiring girls to lead and tackle all those issues that girls in middle school and high school feel, let alone just be a decent human being if I treat myself that way, that it has to start from beginning. And so I've, in the last year or so, made this conscious effort to change how I talk to myself. And it may sound silly, but instead of, being discouraged or at something, I simply give myself a little pep talk. And I think that's one way that I attack my gremlins and keep them out of my brain and out of my head and out of my heart, is by being kinder to myself and treating myself better with kinder words. So that's just one example of that. In her book, she also talks a lot about vulnerability armory and what is the armor that we put on to kind of protect ourselves and hide ourselves from being vulnerable. And so take a moment and just look at these questions and think about that to yourself, about how do you protect yourself? What kind of barriers are you putting up? When did those begin? Was there something or particular or just a long pattern of behavior that brought you to where you are in putting on that armory? And then what would it take to put that armor away? What would it take to make that change, to let yourself be open and to be vulnerable? So think about that for a moment. Please don't forget, if you have comments or questions or want to share, just raise your hand. We can call on you. If you don't want to be called on, just type in your question and I'll chat about it. That's what it's all about. So for me, my vulnerability is definitely one of perfection, and that I strive to be and meet everyone's expectations, which is ridiculous because that's impossible to meet everyone's expectations. But whether that perfection pressure is perceived or real, it's still there. And so for me, knowing that how I was raised, how I grew up, and knowing that it's okay to take that weight off of my own shoulders has helped me in taking that armor away. And really, it's okay to be imperfect. And I wish, everyone in the world could feel that way and that everyone could join in on those feelings. But it does take a lot of vulnerability and courage to open up to the fact that not everything is perfect. So here's one I'd love for people to fill in the blanks or type in your answers or raise your hand. But I'd love for you to know, how do you define vulnerability? What does it mean to you? I've told you a little bit about what it means to me, but what does it mean to you? What is it, or what does it feel like? So like I said, you can type in what it means to you, or you can raise your hand and we can turn the mic over to you. But if you type it, it can be anonymous. I'll just give some examples out loud. Are there any responses, Libby?
We don't. I hope people know where they can type this in. You can just type it in the questions pane, and I can rate them, or you can indicate that you'd like to chat with Alex live. Don't be afraid. I'll get started though, Alex. I'll add my own.
Yeah. I'd love it.
I think, to me, vulnerability is getting comfortable with being uncomfortable and being the truest sense of yourself, even those deep down corners that you choose to ignore. And I think when we're being most true to ourselves, it's freeing when we're when we're ready to accept that. But until then, in a way, it's almost like a ball and chain, like that vulnerability. When you're not quite ready to accept it or get there, I think it's almost like it's a burden. So
Absolutely.
we have
Absolutely.
Eleanor has added, or sorry, Eleanor, if you didn't, you're not on this anymore. She said that vulnerability makes her feel scared, but she tries to embrace it as an opportunity to make a change for the positive.
I love that. It really is. And that's, if you can see it as being an opportunity and know that, like you said, Libby, that it feels like a burden and it feels like it's sometimes too much to get through, but knowing that you will get through it, you will get to that other side, and it will be an opportunity to change and to become a stronger person because of it. That's great. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate it.
Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add about what vulnerability feels like, or what they think about when they think about the word vulnerability?
All right.
Kylie has that vulnerability saying that thing you're not quite sure you should say.
Yes, it is. It is definitely that. It's easier to keep it inside, right? Until that one moment it's not. And you keep it in as long as you possibly can, but having those hard conversations, or as my friend Savannah calls them, the courageous conversations, are so critical to moving any relationship forward, even if it's just one with yourself. And so being able to put words to that, and words and actions, and trusting in yourself and trusting in what may come,
Sure.
it's super tough.
Hannah has added that vulnerability for her means going into something and leading it, knowing it might not make everyone happy, but doing it because it will lead to better outcomes for the greater good. Or she said for the chapter. So I'm assuming Hannah is an undergraduate, but this can be applied to any organization or the company you're working for, or a group that you're involved with, or your family, or anything like that.
That's so true, Hannah. I mean, when you think about just leadership in general, oftentimes you are leading the charge into a new direction and not necessarily having that buy-in from everybody else. But as a leader, you have that vision, and you need to, for those of you who've been to Leadership Academy, model the way. And so it's hard to do that because sometimes you are the only person out there doing what you know to be right and to be in the right direction. And being that first person, it is vulnerable. There's a great TED Talk out there about how to start a movement. It's about 3 minutes long. I highly recommend it. But it takes the video clip of that one guy who's alone at a concert, and it's like an outdoor concert. He's in a field and he is just dancing. And he's the one person just dancing. But pretty soon, another person joins him. And then pretty soon, a couple more people join them. And they've got a big group and they're all dancing. And then more people keep joining and joining this gigantic dance party, which all started because one person felt the need to get up and dance. And so I think that might be a lighthearted way to say that, but really, the more we talk about vulnerability and the more we share about being vulnerable and be open to having those conversations, the more it will make other people feel comfortable. I mean, case in point, what just happened. I mean, Libby shared, I shared, and then it rolled in. Everyone else kind of shared their vulnerability. So I think it's hard to be that first person and to take those first steps, especially when it's a difficult conversation or a difficult situation where you do need to be that leader and do need to have that courage to step out there. But it's something that you will be rewarded in the end. I mean, that is, by taking that risk, is something that is good. So
That's a great
awesome.
segue into another comment that we have from Allison. She says that vulnerability is making mistakes and being okay with them moving forward.
I love it. It is. Because mistakes are what? They're just opportunities to learn and to grow. And so that's what it's all about. I love it.
Yeah, So,
All right.
perfect.
So the book has this great quote about what vulnerability is, and it says vulnerability is not weakness, and the uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure we face every day are not optional. Our only choice is a question of engagement. Our willingness to own and engage with our vulnerability determines the depth of our courage and the clarity of our purpose. The level to which we protect ourselves from being vulnerable is a measure of our fear and disconnection, which I think sums up exactly everything we were just talking about. And she says that vulnerability is the core, the heart, the center of meaningful human experiences. And that's really, if we can tap into that core, then we have that chance of finding even greater courage and really living that authentic and wholehearted life that she was talking about in the video clip. So let's talk a little bit about courage and what happens when we are exposed. She calls it the torture chamber. That is uncertainty. But I'd like you to take a moment and just think of a time in your life where you did something that was courageous or brave. And what role did vulnerability play in that? Did you feel uncertain? Did it feel risky? Did you feel emotionally exposed? About 2 years ago, my mom sat us down, the family, right around Thanksgiving time. And as we were all sitting on the couches staring at each other, you kind of knew this was going to be one of those life-changing moments. And she looked at us and said, you know, I don't want you to be scared, but I have cancer. And I think immediately the word cancer is the essence of vulnerability. Here you are, you have a disease that's taking over your body. There may or may not be a course of treatment. They may not know what the next steps might be. There may not be that treatment plan that you would so hope. And immediately your future is uncertain. And I think about the courage it took for my mom to say those words to the family, knowing that she was the one who was so vulnerable at that moment. But also then, I mean, that's her journey. I can't speak to that. But for me as her daughter, is like time stopped, right? I mean, you're so vulnerable, you're so exposed, you have no idea what's going to happen next. But instinctively, you know that you need to be there for your loved one. And so it's a scary, scary feeling. And we talked about, you know, being comfortable and the uncomfortable, but those moments like that in life, they happen. And you don't know when they're going to come, and you don't know when you're going to need to be brave, and you don't know when you're going to need to tap into that inner core that you've developed. But it's one of those things that you hope that you have developed those skills by taking off your vulnerability armor, that you would be able to address the situation with courage. And so for me, that was one time in my life that I felt so incredibly vulnerable. But knowing that I needed to be there for her was one thing that kept me through. And knowing that she just handled it with such grace and class by saying, it's going to be okay and we're going to figure it out together. And knowing that the next steps would be made together as a family was great. So again, here I am being vulnerable, sharing things I don't normally share. But does anyone have a time that they would like to share where they had to be
Yes.
courageous or brave?
We have one.
Awesome.
Eleanor, I'm going to put you on speaker. I'm reading your comment and I appreciate your honesty. So I'm going to unmute you so that you're able to speak directly to Alex.
Fabulous. Thanks, Lee.
Eleanor, can you hear us? Can we hear you? Eleanor, I don't know if you have a microphone on your computer or if you are calling in. I don't want to ruin your moment. Oh. We still can't hear you, Eleanor. If you want to type in the chat box maybe, or the question box, let me know what's going on. Have you unmuted? You should be able to chat.
So thankful Libby is here doing the technology for me. I've had one of those weeks where I just can't get the technology in my life to work.
Looks like I'm not so much better. My track record is not going so well.
Hey,
Eleanor,
you've got us rolling this far.
Eleanor, if you're okay with me just reading your comment, that's fine. Just type it in the question box and let me know. I don't want to. We're all about being vulnerable, and I want to allow her to have the opportunity. So Eleanor, I don't know if your microphone is working either. If you're okay with me reading it, just type in the questions box so that I can know if you would like me to read this for you. Okay. She is okay with me sharing. She's allowed to allow herself to be vulnerable. Eleanor said, honestly, it was admitting I'm an alcoholic, but it made me the person I am today, full of courage and strength and embracing my vulnerability. I was terrified to admit it, but it was the best risk investment I made. Wow. Great.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing, Eleanor. It's so true. I mean, I can't add more to that. I mean, it is a risk, and you sound like you've made it and understand what that feels like to have that journey. I just appreciate you sharing.
I have another one from Hannah. Hannah, I'm going to try and unmute you so that you can chat with Alex. Hannah, can we hear you?
I'm here.
Oh, there we go.
Oh,
can you
awesome.
hear me?
Hi, Hannah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
So what I was talking about is I'm the marshal in Chi chapter right now. And so obviously I'm right in the middle of planning initiation and all the things that go along with that. And we have some traditions that are specific to our chapter but don't necessarily align with what we believe in Kappa and what we should be doing. So I had to, during our ritual review, tell all the girls we're not going to do it that way anymore. And I know people were upset about that, even seniors who are older than me, and and so it was just a vulnerable moment because I was telling girls who are older than me, sorry, we're not going to do it the way you're used to anymore, even though I know eventually we're going to be happy we did that because it was just something that needed to be done, but no one had done it yet.
Well, I am so proud of you, Hannah, for taking that stance because it is so difficult. But one of the amazing, unique things that we have in Kappa Kappa Gamma is that we share certain values and traditions. And by taking that step and that risk in front of your chapter to uphold those standards and uphold those values in a way that is consistent with all of our chapters is an incredibly brave step to take, but it's also the right step to take. And it is full of uncertainty, right? Because you don't know how your chapter members and sisters are going to react. You have, your seniors who are used to tradition and maybe not used to following along with what's going on and things like that. So I really just want to applaud you for taking that risk because it is tough, but it is a necessary step to take, and you do feel exposed as the marshal and being able to be the one to put that out there. But hopefully you have the support of chapter council and other members of the chapter who can be there to support you and to support the chapter's efforts.
I'm going to add one thing, Alex, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
I think something that Alex and I are both more recent graduates. Alex has been out a little bit longer than I have, but seeing all the things that I learned in Kappa, I didn't join until I was a junior, so I had other experiences to build upon, and then I joined Kappa, but seeing a lot of things that I learned as a student leader in college that I have used in my professional life is incredible. And that one of those types of decisions is really hard, but you're going to find yourself going back to those decisions and those feelings again and again when you're trying to do the right thing and make the right decision, especially in your professional life. And so just taking stock of the things you're learning now. Like it's not just, you're not just the Marshall, you're not just on chapter council. Like a lot of the things you're learning are really great and are preparing you for to be a really great employee, to be a really great contributing member of society.
Mm-hmm. And I think these are really great examples. I mean, sometimes the vulnerability you feel is within yourself, as in with Eleanor's situation and, you know, with the thoughts that go through your head and stuff like that, is that sometimes it's vulnerable with yourself. And sometimes with Hannah, it's vulnerable to others, right? And it's all vulnerability, it's all scary, and it's all super uncertain, but knowing what your values are can really help you start that path by knowing where you need to, where you can turn to, and knowing what your personal values are. So these are great. Did anyone else?
Nope, that's all we have for now. So
Okay.
carry on.
Awesome. So this other quote on this page, it just says, vulnerability sounds like truth and feels like courage. And I think that's it. A lot of times just being vulnerable is speaking the truth and being true to yourself and finding that authentic you. And it's so scary to put your real self out there, but it's so necessary in order to live that wholehearted life that Brene Brown was talking about. In our last couple of minutes, I just wanted to quickly touch on cultural messaging and how that can affect how we feel about ourselves, and how sometimes a lot of our vulnerability can stem from trying to do that comparison game. And so sometimes, you know, you see other things, you think your life is ordinary, meaning it's meaningless, but there's so much extraordinary things in the ordinary. And I put this in here because, you know, yesterday and today there's been a lot on social media about Renee Zellweger. I'm a huge social media celebrity person, whatever. If you haven't followed it, Renee Zellweger had taken the last couple years off from acting, and she appeared on a red carpet the other day with a very changed look from what she was 5 years ago, and the media kind of went crazy, and not in a necessarily very kind way either. And so I think there's a lot to be said about the pressures and expectations that people put on each other, and how a lot of times the expectations that are put on Hollywood or on celebrities or on famous people or things like that tend to trickle down into our everyday lives as well, by what you see on TV or in the magazines you read or music and everything like that. And so sometimes those expectations and messages lead to feeling self-defeat. And so this quote really just touches on it and says, what makes this constant assessing and comparing so self-defeating is that we are often comparing our lives, our marriages, our families, and our communities to unattainable, media-driven visions of perfection. Or we're holding up our reality against our own fictional account of how great someone else has it. Nostalgia is also a dangerous form of comparison. You think about how often we compare ourselves and our lives to a memory that nostalgia has so completely edited that it never really existed. Does anyone else feel that way? I mean, I feel sometimes, you know, from Instagram and blogs and media, and you see these perfect lives and perfect vignettes, and so you want to obtain that by trying to strive for that. But at the end of the day, my house is a mess because I have piles on it because I walked in the door 5 minutes before I needed to do this, and cleaning just sometimes isn't going to happen. Or I walked out the door the other day with a big stain on my shirt because that just happened. I don't know. Maybe this is just me. Does anyone feel that way?
I know I do, Alex. I'm with you there.
Yeah. All right. In the interest of time, I'm skipping this slide. It's not important. If you read the book, they talk about the arena. It's really great. But I wanted to leave with this thought, and to set down those lists of what we're supposed to be is brave. To love ourselves and to support each other in the process of becoming real is perhaps the greatest single act of daring greatly. I have one more clip I'd like to show you from her famous TED Talk.
Here's another way, and I'll leave you with this. This is what I have found. to let ourselves be seen, deeply seen, vulnerably seen, to love with our whole hearts, even though there's no guarantee. And that's really hard. And I can tell you as a parent, that's excruciatingly difficult. To practice gratitude and joy in those moments of kind of terror when we're wondering, can I love you this much? Can I believe in this as passionately? Can I be this fierce about this? Just to be able to stop and instead of catastrophizing what might happen, to say, I'm just so grateful. Because to feel this vulnerable means I'm alive. And the last, which I think is probably the most important, is to believe that we're enough. Because when we work from a place, I believe, that says, I'm enough, then we stop screaming and start listening. We're kinder and gentler to the people around us, and we're kinder and gentler to ourselves. That's all I have.
Okay. Sorry, advertisement, keep right back in. All right, so that is really all I have as well. I want to say thank you to everyone for joining us, and really to know what she said is true, that you are enough. And if there's anything you can take away from this, is maybe you write it on a Post-it note and you look at it every single day. But really tackling those shame gremlins inside of you and saying, what I do matters, who I am matters, and that you are enough is an extraordinary first step in the right direction to leading with vulnerability and courage, and to being able to address those courageous conversations or those difficult situations we may find ourselves in, and to be able to rely on the values that we have, whether it's values that were raised through our family or we received through Kappa Kappa Gamma or things like that. But that is definitely something to start with, is just know that you are enough, and that I am enough and you are enough. So I encourage you, read the book if you haven't yet, Daring Greatly by Brene Brown. It's excellent. It will definitely change your viewpoint on life. It certainly has for me. And continue the conversation. These are not easy conversations to have. It's nice that we have, computers and miles of internet in between us, but I encourage you to try and have these conversations face to face with the people in your life. Maybe it's a good friend that you are sitting here listening with, or maybe you can give someone a call and just chat about vulnerability, and you'd be surprised to know that you're not the only one out there with feelings like that, and that we all have them, and talking about what your armor is that you put on to protect yourself from vulnerability. And it may be different what you see on yourself than what someone else sees, and to explore those possibilities. So I encourage you to continue that conversation and to open yourself up to being vulnerable and to dare greatly, as Brene Brown says. So thank you so much for joining us tonight. Here's my email if you want to continue the conversation with me, or if you have questions or comments or concerns, please reach out to me. I am happy to chat about this. It's something I just really like talking about. It's scary and pushes me outside my comfort zone, but I think it's definitely necessary, and I do appreciate that opportunity. So that's my email, kkgalex@gmail.com, if you want to get in touch. So thank you again for joining us tonight. I really appreciate it. Libby, do you have anything else?
I do. I just have a thank you to Alex for presenting this. This was a great webinar. I certainly needed to hear this. As explaining to Alex, some things in my life have been going a little rough lately, and hearing this message is definitely reaffirms of just what I need to be hearing, and the voices that I need to be listening to, and telling the other ones to be quiet. So thank you again, Alex, for leading this session. And thank you, everyone, for your participation and vulnerability today. If you have questions or comments on today's topic, Alex has her email up on the screen, so please feel free to reach out to her. She's a great resource. If you'd like to be involved in Kappa's virtual learning and training webinar programs, we would love to have you join our producer team. Please contact Karen Holmes at KKG headquarters for details. The benefits are excellent. The opportunity to support Kappa's webinar program, and a front row seat, and a great presentation. As we close the webinar, a survey will open on your screen. You'll be prompted to respond to a few evaluation questions. Please take a moment and share your thoughts on tonight's webinar. Your feedback will help us shape future webinar training events. And if you have any additional questions or comments whatsoever, please send an email to education@kkg.org. And that's all we have tonight. If anybody else has anything, please write them in the questions box. Otherwise, have a great evening, and thank you again for joining in. All right.